Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today I am once again joined by Issam and we'll be discussing the third round of the Exact Cross series which took place in Meulebeke. Issam, once again thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
But before we get into the racing, today's podcast is brought to you by Big Bubble Hats. We of the Cyclocross Social platform will be teaming up with Big Bubble Hats for the upcoming winter because all cyclocross fans know the importance of keeping their head warm whilst watching cross races in the cold winter in the fields. Finding the perfect hat is very tough, and that's why Big Bubble Hats took measures into their own hands in 2010 to start designing hats. Now they sell over 100 different hats, most with their characteristic big bubbles, so whichever one is your taste, well, there will be a Big Bubble hat for you. They are great for the great outdoors due to being warm, cozy, as well as bright, so you can easily be spotted on TV when you attend one of the races. We at Cyclocross Social will be giving away 2 Big Bubble hats a month from October until February over on our Instagram stories. All you need to do is to participate in our quizzes, which we do every Tuesday under the name Quiz It Tuesday. So we'll be giving away 2 hats of choice per month there, and we will be giving away 1 hat on Twitter and 1 hat on our podcast throughout the rest of the season. Additionally, you can use the code CXSocial15 all in caps for 15% discount at checkout. That is CXSocial15 for 15% discount at checkout. Make sure to follow Big Bubble Hats and Cyclocross Social to stay warm this winter. Today there were no hats needed in Meulebeke. The sun was out after a week full of rain, so there was a bit of mud on the course, but that didn't seem to hamper Toon van der Bos, who had a very rapid start as he took the lead early on in the race. Quickly it was Michael Vanthourenhout who took over and already opened the gap, but he got caught at the end of lap 1. There was a big leading group, but after 2 laps, Pauwels Sauze duo of Vanthourenhout and Iserbyt had enough, and Vanthourenhout upped the pace. Iserbyt was the only one able to follow, especially since Van der Haar and Sweeck both missed their starts. Last week's, surprise in a way, Pim Ronhaar was also experiencing a terrible first lap as he was outside of the top 30. He would never come back to the front in that race. Sweeck, however, was able to come back towards the front of the race. He was on a charge and overtook riders left, right and centre, and then eventually caught Iserbyt, who had been dropped slightly by Michael Vanthourenhout. After a fabulous passage through the sand, it was Vanthourenhout that was also caught, and we had 3 leaders with Ryan Kamp closely following behind. The duo of Pauwels Sauze waited for a bit and then started to mount the pressure on Sweeck. It was Vanthourenhout who was in second wheel and let the gap fall on his teammate Iserbyt out front. Sweeck then was forced to react, but under pressure he made a mistake. He slipped on the stairs, fell pretty nasty, and broke his shoe. His race was over, at least in terms of the race for the win. But quite coincidentally, exactly at that moment, it was Lars van der Haar, the European champion, who caught Michael Vanthourenhout. He then stormed towards the front and caught Iserbyt, which meant we again had 3 leaders. Again 2 riders of Pauwels Sauze, Vanthourenhout and Iserbyt, with Van der Haar. Van der Haar tried what he could to not be put into the same position as Sweeck, and that kind of succeeded. But eventually he just had to admit that the Pauwels Sauze riders were both stronger. After the barriers, which Vanthourenhout could hop and Van der Haar needed to walk, Vanthourenhout opened a slight gap, and that slight gap got bigger and bigger. 5 seconds became 7 seconds, became 10 seconds, and eventually became almost 20 seconds. Vanthourenhout cruised on towards his second win of the season, whilst in the background Iserbyt attacked in the final lap. Van der Haar could not respond, which meant that the European champion had to settle for another 3rd place. The podium, Vanthourenhout ahead of Iserbyt and Van der Haar. Quite a lot happened in the race, but at the same time, it feels like I've kind of been watching the same race for the past couple of weeks. It's always the same. Vanthourenhout goes in lap 1, then gets caught, Iserbyt goes, and then it's a matter who's going to catch Iserbyt. If you don't catch him, he's gone. If you do catch him, Vanthourenhout goes again.
Yeah, the usual suspects, huh? I mean, we know that Vanthourenhout and Iserbyt are always going to be up there. And Van der Haar and Sweeck, again, on the back foot a little bit. Then have to come back after a poor start. Van der Haar was not starting very well and had to change his bike in the first lap, which is going to cost you a lot of positions, especially like you said already in the summary. The group is very bunched, so that's not 2 or 3 riders that are going to pass you. It's way more, and we came to the same scenario in a way as we had in Beringen, where Vanthourenhout attacks, then Iserbyt waits, Iserbyt comes back, then attacks, and you're always going to be in a tough position as if you are the opposition. And we have to be honest as well, I think these two are just at the moment in the men's category, with the riders that are available to race, are the better guys. And it's tough to beat them, especially because they are from the same team, so they can play these tactics a little bit. But we got to be honest, today it was not only tactics, it was basically the two guys, in my opinion, that were the stronger. For Van der Haar, I think it cost him maybe a little bit too much to get back to the front. I would love to see him for once having a good start, and a bit of a shame that Sweeck had to tumble on the stairs. And I think, in my opinion, for Sweeck, the sunglasses that he had on were probably in his way because they were a bit too big for him, I think. I don't know what you think about that, but in general about the race, yeah, same as we have seen in Beringen.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that Iserbyt at the moment is slightly stronger than the rest, although Vanthourenhout was also strong. But I think it was more a matter of who was the freshest at the end. I think that Sweeck made a very good impression. He was on an absolute charge, and okay, this is a course for him. A bit of mud, on and off the bike, some corners, nice sand pit. It's a course for Sweeck, of course, we have to admit that, but I do think he looked good today, and ultimately he made a mistake under pressure, and that happens. Van der Haar, he's been chasing for 40 minutes, and don't forget, today there was a lot of wind, and yes, he had a bad start. He was then also hampered by a bike change, and it's not great for him, but I don't know, I feel like I still, of course, Beringen made something clear, and that's that at least on that day, Iserbyt was a bit better. But I think that if you're on a bit flatter course, I don't know. I don't know if Iserbyt is really the best. It looked like he had something left in the final lap, but Vanthourenhout also looked strong. But equally, the amount of effort that Sweeck and Van der Haar had to put in after a bad start is also significant. So I'm not too sure who really is the strongest. I do think that Iserbyt is probably just slightly better than the rest, but on the other hand, if Iserbyt really thinks he is the best, knowing the person who Iserbyt is, he will never let the other rider of his team, in this case Vanthourenhout, have a shot at winning. If he's really strong, he finishes off himself. Then if he's gone in the second or third or fourth lap, they don't see him back. And that's something that's different this year compared to the early races in the last few seasons. There, once Iserbyt was gone, he was completely gone. And now riders are able of catching him. And it does cost a lot of effort. And then ultimately they bounce on the fact that Paul Sousa has more riders. But I think we can still be in for a couple of interesting races over in the States, where it looks to be a bit drier as well, which should suit the riders Van der Haar and Sweeck. So I'm interested, but in my opinion at least, Van der Haar and also Sweeck could have competed for the win here today if they had a better start, and in the case of Sweeck, hadn't made a silly mistake under pressure.
Yeah, I definitely think that for Sweeck and Van der Haar, it didn't help them out, the situation where they started with. Sweeck definitely had to spend some energy to get back into the front, and the same goes for Van der Haar, so that influenced the race for them definitely. And for Sweeck it doesn't help if you tumble over the stairs, so that doesn't help their situations, and then it's obviously going to be tough to fight for the podium. Van der Haar eventually able to bring the third place home, and Sweeck after the tumble maintained that fourth position, so that was where they ended up in the end.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how it goes forward. And Sweeck, last week he wasn't racing in Beringen. Got a couple of eyebrows raised over that. By now we've learned that that was because he couldn't reach an agreement over his starting contract. He was not happy with Erwin Vervecke, the guy who hands out those starting contracts. Sweeck said that because his manager was in Australia, I assume for the Road World Championships, he was dealing with the race organizer himself. They waited super long to give him a deal with the starting money, and then he said that Erwin Vervecke only gave him 1/3 of what he gets at other races, and therefore decided not to go. Vervecke defended himself by saying Sweeck had a bad season last year and didn't deserve more than that, but Sweeck, well, he thought his own of that and was like, no, I'm not starting, you pay this or I don't start. But I don't think it really hampered him today in terms of race rhythm. He did training then, And ultimately today, after that crash, he managed to recover to a 4th place, which was decent and, well, the maximum you could expect. But I think, to be honest, yeah, he shouldn't have made that mistake. But on the other hand, I think the bigger mistake was when he saw that Iserbyt made that move past him and he sat in 3rd, because you knew, especially on the section he was in, that the gap would be dropped by Vanthourenhout. And I am always annoyed by the team tactics being played. There's nothing wrong with it, especially if it happens in this way. It's allowed, it's smart from a team perspective, but personally I want to see them fight it out against each other rather than having team games involved. But nothing wrong with it, but Sweeck should have seen that coming, and that's the difference between Sweeck and Van der Haar. When Van der Haar was in that position, he knew what he had to do, and he knew that that wasn't allowed to happen because he would be on the back foot. And ultimately, I think that is why Sweeck made that slip, because he was under pressure to close that gap of 6-7 seconds, which was formed super quickly. I don't know how you think about that Sweeck incident, or just in general about how Sweeck looked throughout the race and what to expect from him going to the start of the World Cup in the States.
I think it looks promising. It's been a while that we have seen Sweeck at the start of a season performing well. Now we can see that it's not a coincidence, that it's something that we can expect from him for the coming races, I guess, and also for the World Cup, which is coming up next week. In the race itself, you mentioned that the moment that Iserbyt overtook them both around the outside. You know, it's a very difficult place to overtake, and it was quite a good overtake from Iserbyt and crucial in a way as well. It was a perfect executed team tactic in a way to for Vanthourenhout to drop the gap, and he did it perfectly. And then for Sweeck, yeah, then you're in a position where you want to bridge the gap. Maybe you have good legs. I was feeling that it was not going to be far off and he was going to crack a little bit, but you know, he was still going very decent. But we never know. And then obviously he had the silly tumble on the stairs, something with the shoe, had to make sure that was okay. And it obviously it wasn't the hardest hit on the stairs, but it was definitely not something you want during a race. And you know, it for sure hampered him in the end. And it's a bit difficult, especially if you know that you have the legs for maybe to get a podium. Yeah, then it demoralizes a little bit, and then you just try to finish the race, which he basically did in quite okay fashion. So yeah, I think overall for Sweeck, just a promising performance and something take with you to the States and see what you can do there for the first World Cup race.
Let's run down our entire top 10 then. We of course have that top 4, which we already thoroughly discussed. The win for Michael Vanthourenhout ahead of Eli Iserbyt and Lars van der Haar, with in 4th place Laurens Sweeck. 5th place went to Corné van Kessel, who rode a very strong race. We'll talk about that in a bit. He just beat Ryan Kamp in the end of the race. Betsema ended 7th ahead of Toon van der Bos, Jente Michels, and the 10th place was for Jens Adams. So, well, let's not waste any time, Issam. Let's talk about Corné van Kessel. Had a rapid start, was up there. I thought he would blow up like pretty big, because that's kind of what happened last week in Beringen, but it was quite the opposite. He, well, dropped back a little bit, but then managed to consolidate himself in that second group and ends 5th. And I think this is the result that he needs to get going, because he is without a contract from January 1st. He doesn't have a team because Tormans isn't extending his contract. I've heard rumors that he is being approached, or at least talking with, the new Kitchens team, which Dieter Sweeck is riding for. It's a one-man team at the moment, would become 2, or maybe a UCI team then if they sign another woman, but that could be interesting. I think he rode a decent race and maximized his result in the end.
He did maximize his result in the end, I think. So it was definitely something that I, in a way, did not expect. Especially his later part of the race, where he was basically able to maintain his 5th position. We have seen different from him, but you know, it was, we said it already in Beringen, that it was quite hard to already judge his form in a very atypical race. Now today we finally get a race which is a bit more of what we normally see in Belgium in terms of racing. It has a lot of elements in it. It's a very nice course, actually. And then you can obviously judge a bit easier. You already had that first race, in the pocket, so you then go into that second race with, I wouldn't say more experience, but you at least know what to expect, and you have that race rhythm in a way. You're still a bit off, but it can work out already, and we have definitely seen that for him this is one of the results that he needs to do consistently over the season. And then it will be a matter of time before we hear a new sponsor or a new team that will take him in, I think.
Well, consistency, you already mentioned the key word. We've discussed it a couple of times already, a couple of young riders coming through the ranks, and today we again see some of these younger riders in the top 10. I mean, sure, we have the usual suspects of Adams and Van der Bos in the top 10, but Kamp and especially Vitesse find some consistency of getting in the top 10, but on the other hand, last week we had a very strong Pimmer on Haar. He only ends 15th today, never really was in the race after a terrible first lap. Thibaut Nys, DNF. Emil Verstringen, DNF. Johan Viseuren also didn't really see him at the front of the race after the first lap anymore. He ends 17th, just ahead of David Haverdings. It's difficult, it's really a big group of riders that's competing for the places in the second half of the top 10. And Van Kessel today has the upper hand. We don't know what was up with Verstringen or Nys. We don't know what happened with Ron Haar. There's no reports of that yet as we're recording right after the race. But it's interesting to see that especially Nys and Ron Haar, who made a strong impression last week, are then basically nowhere today. And I think that's indeed the key word, consistency. We've mentioned it many times already, so maybe I should mention it a bit less, but it really is key for these riders. It's about finding that consistency. If you can get in that top 10 every week, you can move forward. If you're yo-yoing a bit, then you're still having a good season maybe, and you might have a very solid result at the championships, but in the end, if you can be in that top 10 every week, you're definitely putting your name forward, because there's choices that need to be made by these teams that have many youngsters coming through. Who are we going to give the contract? Who are we going to keep when they are out of the under-23 categories? And for that, you need to find those solid results week in, week out. And you can't expect it to be every week, but especially now early on in the season when there's still some names missing and it's relatively easy to put your name forward, you should be capitalizing on that momentum and that possibility. But at the same time, I don't know, maybe you can give some insight on how the under-23 season looked like. It's very contradicting, because on one hand you have the opportunity now to show yourself, but on the other hand, later on in the season is really when the under-23s have the important moments. Maybe you can give a bit more insight on how the under-23 calendar looks like.
Yeah, I mean, for the under-23, definitely right now is not the most important part of the season. Going into, for example, the World Cup, 5 manches. We have Tabor and Maasmechelen at the end of October. And then from there on, it's basically December and January, which are going to be important for them. And especially January, where you have 3 manches of the World Cup for the under-23. Obviously, you also got the XTO Badkamers Trophy, which also have an under-23 categorized classification next to the elites. So that is where the focus is going to be. And obviously, we all know in January the jerseys are given for the national championships and the worlds as well. And of course, you have the European Championship, which is also coming up, and that is going to be important for them. But in the end, if you become world champion or if you win the classification of the World Cup, those are things that are quite important. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are going to be some under-23 guys that are going to be thinking, well, my season is still a very long way to go, and I have some goals that I still want to achieve in the World Cup and stuff, and that's what I'm going to be aiming for. But it's not easy if you are already struggling with consistency right now at the early season, with the fatigue and all the races that you have to do and mixing it up, both elite and under-23. You need quite some, you need quite the planning to make sure that you get through those races well. And, you know, sometimes luck is also a very important factor in these situations. So it's going to be interesting to see what the programs are going to be for the under-23 guys and the ones that are just around that category. And I think it's going to be quite interesting to see the battles unfold in that category for sure.
Yeah, and Kurt Wouters, who is the trainer at the Krelan team, already indicated that he and his riders raced on the road longer and therefore are hoping to be better later on in the season, started late with specific cyclocross training. So I think you see that as a clear difference here. Viseur definitely not in the form he had last year, whereas Kamp and Meuse, who have already been training on the cross bike for quite a while, are looking to be in better form. So, yeah, it's interesting. I think we'll be in for some interesting races and shouldn't worry too much that Nice and Verstringen DNF this race. I think we only should get starting worried if this becomes to become a tendency. If Nice also does bad in Waterloo, Fayetteville, then Tabor, which is an under-23 World Cup, fails to deliver there, then I think you should start getting worried and thinking, hey, something is not going right, there's something structurally wrong. But as long as that isn't the case, we should just wait and see and hope for an entertaining season. Something that was certainly entertaining was the women's race. It was for once not Marie Schreiber who had the fastest start, but Inge van der Heijden. However, van der Heijden was quickly recalled by Van Empel, who applied the pressure in the first lap, but she wasn't able to break away. Just like in the men's race, it was very close in the first couple of laps, but ultimately it were Brand and Van Empel who broke away from the rest. The two main protagonists of the Exact Cross in Beringen also looked to be headed towards a 1v1 battle here in Meulebeke. However, Denise Betsema was never fully out of it. She was yo-yoing behind these two riders, being dropped and coming back all of the time. It did, however, look to be that in the penultimate lap, Brand and Van Empel were gone. This was after Van Empel had placed an attack in the sandpit. Van Empel, however, made a mistake, causing her gap of 8 seconds over Brand to be gone. Van Empel slid in a very slippery downhill and needed to awkwardly save herself from crashing, and from there on the momentum completely changed. Van Empel, who had been having the upper hand in the sandpit all of the time, all of a sudden couldn't make it through and needed to run the entire sandpit. Going into the final lap, Betsema reconnected with these two leaders. Van Empel made a gesture, attack Denise, but Denise stayed in the wheel, so Van Empel took the matters into her own hands and attacked. That didn't really last though, because Brand was able to follow pretty easily, and that then resulted in a new tactical game. Van Empel hoped to be having the advantage in the sandpit again and wanted to have the lead. Brand knew this and wanted to have the lead as well. They went side by side through a couple of corners, and ultimately that led to Van Empel going into the sandpit first. But she wasn't able to utilize on this opportunity to drop Brand in the sandpit. Brand was able to stay with Van Empel because Van Empel needed to walk. These two were heading towards a sprint, but because the pace dropped, Betsema was able to come back. However, Betsema did not attack, she just sat in the wheel and settled for third. Bit of a weird decision. Brand in the lead looked to be in the wrong position because Van Empel could come from behind to try something. But with 400 meters to go, Van Empel very weirdly placed an attack. Van Empel's attack didn't last, unsurprisingly, which ultimately led to Brand taking the lead on the athletics track and winning the sprint ahead of Van Empel. My summary basically became an extensive debrief of the final lap already, Issam, because some very weird things happening there. Van Empel using some pretty weird tactics, in my opinion.
I was baffled, to be honest, when I saw the sprint. But in general, also the last lap, I didn't really understand why you would attack. Because when we entered the last lap, basically Betsema arrived, finally was able to make contact with the two in front. And then, Van Empel asked just before the last lap if Betsema could try to attack. I guess Betsema couldn't or didn't want to or whatever. And then Van Empel attacks entering the last lap. And, for somebody that has a sprint, that knows that she can rely on that sprint, she just went for it. There were some interesting moments in that last lap. And in general, the gap that she had before on Brand, where she gave it away on probably her strongest part in a way, the technical sections. Yeah, I didn't understand. And then you try so hard to get in front for the sprint. You are in front. And then you're trying to let her back, especially such a sprint, which I think 200 meters is already in the corner. So you want to make sure that when you exit the corner, you're in the front, and it's if you exit that corner in the track and field track, you know, nobody is going to pass you. It's I don't know. Like I was seriously, I was baffled, and I guess her interview. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that interview, but that interview was even weirder in my opinion.
Yeah, that interview, and she was saying there that she kind of, I don't know, how do you summarize what she said in that interview? Because on one hand she was saying I made a mistake, on the other hand she was saying I don't care that I lost because it's only an exact cross and I see this race as preparation for the rest of the season. I care about the World Cups, they start next week, I have some learning points, and I would rather finish second by attacking than just winning again in a sprint like last week, which is weird, it's contradicting. I feel like, at least for me, the general sense of the message was I made a mistake. I know I made mistakes, but on the other hand, it's only an exact cross, so I don't really care all too much, although I don't really want to admit I made big mistakes, because in the end, I would rather have won than ended second, but I feel like she didn't really want to say that. But yeah, I think, to be honest, Paul Sauze, in the women's side, there is no mechanism between the two riders whatsoever. Betsema and Van Empel, no teamwork. They had the opportunities to do something, especially in the last lap. I don't know if Betsema ever thought about winning this race. When she came back, that's the moment. You have the overspeed. Steer onto the grass and absolutely send it. You know you don't have a sprint against Brand and Van Empel. Why don't try it? Going into the last lap, it shouldn't have been Van Empel who tried to attack. It should have been Betsema who tried to attack. But Betsema was sitting in, whilst she knew she already got dropped. And yes, you might be tired at that moment or not have the legs, but the only thing you can try is to surprise them. Maybe Brand is thinking, well, I'm not feeling too great after this. Maybe Van Empel will close it. I don't know. There should have been some sort of coherence between the two, and I didn't see that today. And we know that Van Empel is leaving the team, and we know that the team isn't happy with that. So I feel like that isn't going particularly well, and that in the end Van Empel made a couple of mistakes and loses the race due to them. But Betsema could have also done a bit more, because if Betsema flies over, Brand needs to put an acceleration. As soon as Brand catches Betsema on that final straight, Van Empel can launch her sprint, and then she's able to take the win. But, well, it is what it is, and I think that that's something we'll see going forward a bit, how that develops. Like, will they keep racing each other? Because I did see them chase each other a few times early on in the race when Betsema did take the lead. Van Empel closed the gap. I don't think Matt Penninger will be happy with that. How will that develop throughout the season? I don't know what you think about how it will develop, Issam, and if you even think it was really a big deal today.
During the race, I've indeed seen already that I think when Betsema was up there, that she went to the front, and Van Empel definitely didn't want to leave a gap there. But I didn't see that part as a big deal, to be honest. I think that, you know, Van Empel at that moment had the legs to win and was like, you know, for now I'm not gonna play those tactics. It's not necessary. That's a decision you make during a race, and especially like you said, if they didn't have these we haven't seen these tactics from them that often, so it's very hard to then expect that on a fly you're gonna be making a decision to do that. But I definitely just think, especially for that last lap, I didn't really understand what Betsema was doing. It was especially when she made contact with the two in front. You know, that's the moment to go. You don't even have to think about it, because you basically already know that you're going to be third. You're not going to have a sprint to beat them. And you have Van Empel there that maybe because she was asking to attack, maybe could have been a very good helping hand there and somewhere created a gap or something. But I guess Betsema, for whatever reason, didn't feel the need to attack. Maybe it was just not really feeling right. It's very easy for us to sit in a chair and say she should have attacked or she should have done this or that, and we don't know how she felt when she bridged that gap to the two in front. But yeah, the whole last lap for me, a bit of a shame, because the race was actually quite fun to watch and it was super entertaining, even to the last lap. But and the last lap itself was also entertaining, but it was just a couple of moves which I really didn't understand. And hopefully next week she will learn from this, I guess, and we will see an improvement with Van Empel.
Well, I think Betsema can also still improve. I think her form is improving slightly, but let's also face it, Brand and Van Empel are clearly better than the rest at the moment. The only reason Betsema is still able to compete for the win, or well, have a shot at the win, which she didn't take, is because of the wind. There was a lot of wind today, and that led to every time that they attacked, that they waited on the longer straights because they didn't want to take headwind. There was a storm in Belgium last night and there was still a lot of wind due to that. So I do think that Brand and Betsema are clearly a cut above the rest. Betsema is slowly improving, but I don't think that it's enough at the moment. Maybe for once she is building on towards later in the season and she will be able to compete at the championships. At the moment, I remain cautious in my expectations around Betsema. There's still some riders missing, and I think once they come, Betsema will be consistently around the top 5, but I think that it will be difficult for her to be competing for wins this season. But we'll wait and see. I'm happy to be proven wrong on that one. Because especially now, Van Empel, the news is out that she is considering riding the World Championships with the elites. No surprise there in my opinion. We already discussed this earlier, that if she continues like this, she should 100% do it. But that's a different discussion, and we already went over that one in our preseason podcast, so let's not do that again. I do think, however, that if we look at this race, Brand not on her game technically today. Early on in the race, terrible through the stand pit a couple of times, made a slip in the first lap in a muddy corner downhill in the U-turn before going up the bigger climb again. Not great in my opinion. Think there's still a bit of rustiness in her. Last week we could also see it. She was under big pressure in the downhill in Beringen by Van Empel. Do you think that that's going to be improving again throughout the rest of the season, or do you think that maybe there is something else going on with Brand?
Well, I don't think particularly something else is going on with Brand, but what I do think, however, is her preparation for this season might be a little bit different than it was for last season, I think. And now her last race on the road was the Vuelta. That's the second week of September. Then, of course, we don't know when she went back on the cross bike, train with Sven Nys again, who we know is very important in making sure that the technique is worked on. It's difficult to say. I think that's probably Nys. Yeah, has also 2 eyes, sees what's going on. He's more of an expert in technique than we are, so he must have seen the things that went wrong, and probably knows as well that there needs to be work done on that part in terms of technique. And having Sven Nys as your coach is probably the best thing that could happen to cyclocross riders, especially if you want to learn some tricks, technical and stuff. So I think that it will improve over the season for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And the role of Sven Nys in the career of Lucinda Brand is incredibly important. I think it's fair to say that without the transfer of Lucinda Brand from Sunweb to Trek Baloise, she was never going to become cyclocross world champion. Her technique was just too rusty for it, and that's completely changed now. She is decent enough to be up there, and yes, it's not perfect, and yes, it can always be better. You can always be Puk Pietersen on a bike or Van Empel, but that's not needed because Brand has a bit of extra power. I think Brand will continue to improve. Next week, Waterloo is an important race for her as it's at the factory of her sponsor, Trek. I think she will be up there fighting again with Van Empel, and we already saw last year an amazing battle there between Brand and Vos, and Van Empel in many ways resembles Vos. Both have a very strong sprint, which is their weapon against Brand. Both are also incredibly explosive and pretty damn strong technical. So yeah, I think we should be in for some exciting races here. I don't expect Betsema to be up there next week, but maybe she is able. Last year she kind of surprised us in that race by doing well there despite traveling there super late. So we'll wait and see on that. And I think for the rest, with the other riders coming to the field as well. We don't know when Vos will be starting, but when she's there, when Pieters is there, when Van Androoy is there, it's going to be an absolute feast in these races. So let's look at the top 10, because maybe we find some other riders that should be able to compete. 4th place, behind the podium of Brand, Van Empel and Betsema, is Inge van der Heijden. 5th place went to Marion Norbert and Ribeirol, ahead of Aniek van Alphen and Ceyin del Carmen Alvarado. Then 8th place went to Anna Kay, ahead of Marie Schreiber and Amandie Foucounet. Kind of the usual suspects here, not that much to say. I think again a strong race from Ribeirol, but not too much to comment on that. But Alvarado, we have learned finally what was the case last season. She was infected with Pfeiffer the last season, and that hampered her, but they only found out super late or even after the season. So that's also why she didn't do that much this summer to fully recover from that. Today, she was up there in the early phases of the race, Issam, but I already warned that she was going to explode based on what happened in Beringen, and that happened, because despite a good first half of the race, in the second half she faded and still got overtaken by Ribeirol, who was a solid 20 seconds behind her at some point.
Just too eager, I guess, especially when you know that the base is still probably not there, or you already experienced the race as Beringen, to then take the lead, be around there in the front. It's all about composure in a way. You should... it's a bit what we had last season, a bit about Van Kessel, that we were saying why he's starting so fast, but it's something you're used to, and when you know that you are able to reach a level, or you have reached a level in the past, it's quite tough to tell yourself that you need to be a little bit more calmer, you need to take the start a bit easier, make sure that you conserve as much energy as possible to make sure that you get through the race as consistent as possible. And I think that part is definitely not there yet, especially if you look how significantly she lost time compared to the others in the later part of the race. But it's early season, so it's still a long way to go for her as well, and there are promising signs. But for me, it looks like there is no base, or there's at least no the condition is there, but it's not what it needs to be, and that's visible today in the result.
Yeah, I think it's of course a difficult situation for Alvarado to be in. A Pfeiffer infection is pretty serious. You can experience the effects of that for years, and I don't know when Alvarado will come back to her prime level. Will it ever happen? I hope so. I don't wish it to happen to anybody, that they can't perform at their best anymore, but we need to wait and see. And in the meanwhile, there are some promising signs. Things apparently are going better than last season, so we need to wait and see, and hopefully we will see Alvarado back at the best of her abilities soon. I think for the rest, if we look at the top 10, Schreiber and Foucounet, decent results. Foucounet, very strong rider. If she had a decent technique, she would be dangerous, but she doesn't have a good technique, so she ends 10th today in a technical course. But I was most surprised by a rider just outside of the top 10, Fleur Moors, second year junior. She's racing for Paul Sauze. Keep an eye on this kid, because she's ending 12th already here, which is a very good result. But if you look on the road, she already ended 12th as a first year at the World Championships in Wollongong. She already did well at the European Championships as well. Was strong in the Waterslee Ladies Challenge, which is a Nations Cup. Also did the Nations Cup of Borselen. Ended 9th in a stage there, in the echelon stage. So definitely promising signs there. Belgium needs talent. I read an article today on Het Nieuwsblad that they were hoping that no Belgian woman going to the USA would be an eye-opener, that they would scrap the races there. But in my opinion, they are overlooking the problem. Belgium doesn't have relevant cross riders at the moment. Yes, they have Kant, who decides not to go because she doesn't want to deal with the jet lag. But Kant, I've already said many times, is past her prime. It's a slowly dying candle, and it's going out every season a bit, and respect for what she does and the career she had, and she will be able to get in the top 10 a couple of times, like we already saw in Meulebeke. Yes, she was sick this week, but Kant will never be able to consistently fight for wins, and that's a reality they need to accept. And behind Kant there really is nothing in Belgium, and there never has been anything behind Kant in Belgium, because they were always reliant on older riders like Van Looy, Kim van der Stene, Jolien Verschuren, of course, unfortunately passed away due to having cancer. So it's difficult, but now they already have Shandy the shoesitter coming through, who's a first-year junior, Fleur Moors, a second-year junior. There's some more Belgian talents coming through. Definitely keep an eye out on Fleur Moors. Issam, I don't know if you saw some other riders that you were surprised by and you still want to mention?
No, I think we went through them quite well. Ribeiro for me looked very good. But yeah, that's basically it. I think everybody kind of fell in his place. Bakker, a bit disappointing, and Kant, 15th, a bit too far back in my opinion, but already was complaining before the race about cold or flu that she had during the week, so maybe a bit understanding if you take that in consideration. And overall, I think everybody came in his place outside of the top 5 and top 10.
Yeah, Bakker came back from a knee injury, and whilst we're at that, we can still talk very shortly about Yara Kastelein. She was racing Giro d'Emilia on the road again. She only hopped on the cross bike because she felt like it last week. That certainly went well. She ended 5th on the road bike again, and she will be racing 2 more races on the road, including Tour de Romandie, before she finally really gets her cross season going. So that's interesting to see as well. I think then we have covered it, everything of the Exact Cross in Meulebeke. Issam, thank you for being here.
Yes, no worries, thank you.
We'll be back later in this week with a preview of the World Cup, which is starting next week in Waterloo, and we'll of course cover that as well. Thanks for listening. Make sure to use the code CXSocial15 for 15% discount off your Big Bubble hat, and then we will see you guys again very soon. Goodbye.